the role of natural gas in the energy transition. It's a pleasure having Cyrus Brooks and Robert Brooks today. Let me show the LinkedIn page of Cyrus Brooks. Cyrus is an engineer, public relations with extensive international experience, and Dr. Robert is a PhD and founder and chairman at RBAC Incorporation. At the end, I will ask Dr. Robert to bring his experience and how his company can collaborate with government and companies. But let's go to the points first to our audience. So, good afternoon, Cyrus, Robert, and our audience.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah.
Dr. Robert, natural gas is my experience. I'm not so experienced as you are, but have characteristics that make it fundamental for the energy transition. Would it be the best source of energy for the transition, and what are the reasons if it's right?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. First of all, natural gas as a commodity for production of electricity around the world, and especially in places at the moment, in places which have developed economies, is something that you can totally control. Okay, so it is not subject to environmental changes that might occur, whether the wind is blowing or whether the sun is shining, those kinds of things. So it is what we call dispatchable. Electricity is available through the use of natural gas. There are other commodities like coal, which also have this, and nuclear. The problem, of course, with coal is that it comes with a lot of what we call baggage in the United States, which is, of course, it's generally poor for air quality. And besides that, when you're accounting for carbon dioxide, it emits a lot of carbon dioxide in comparison with natural gas, and certainly, of course, nuclear, which emits no carbon dioxide. So I think the main thing for power is that natural gas is a fuel that you can generate power much more cleanly than you could with coal. And as long as the price is right, which is very important, it also operates as, or it can be, a transition fuel, which is cleaner than coal for the developing world. However, it is crucial that it be affordable in order for it to actually operate that way, to act as a transition fuel in substituting for coal. But natural gas is also very flexible in terms of it can be used for other things than generating electricity. So it is used, for example, in the United States and much of the world, especially in northern climates where the wintertime is cold or the summertime is cold. If you're talking about, let's say, southern part of Argentina or Chile, then where you have winter, then you need it for space heating, and it's very good, of course, for space heating in residential and commercial. And then, of course, it has many industrial uses as well. So it's a very important commodity for so many different parts of our economic, for our economic system as it is on this planet right now.
Perfect. Cyrus, there is a comment from Luis Sergio. So please, could you please comment this? Natural gas is a source of transition of energy. I cannot read very well here. And the
guarantee of safety of the renewable is the bridge.
Yes, please, Cyrus, go ahead.
Yeah, this is I think the renewable energy sources like solar PV and photovoltaic, and also the wind power through turbines and other sources of energy, even tidal and all sorts of onshore wind, offshore wind, all these things are dependent on weather. And I think there's a really, as Dr. Brooks pointed out, there's a very important point is that I mean, although we can predict perhaps with solar, that, one day to the next, well, tomorrow I don't think it's going to be cloudy, so we should be okay. But we're only okay between 9 and 5. And, it pretty much is at maximum between like 10 and 2, depending on your latitude, right? What are you going to do the rest of the time? Well, I think with dispatchable energy, whether it's nuclear, coal, or natural gas, one thing you have is you have prediction. And you don't have prediction just one day to the next. You have prediction, all the way into the future, months ahead, or, and you have some idea of what of fuel that you're going to have. So this, as far as the question goes, we talk about renewable energy and the energy transition. Well, you're not going to really be able to support. Okay, let's just assume for the fact that we want to put solar energy on the grid, and we want to make that a major part of the grid. Well, if we do that, then we have to be able to support that, earlier, pretty much until about 11, if you're lucky, and then after about 4, you're going to start to ramp, on and off solar power onto other fuels.
Yeah.
And natural gas has found to be very well suited for that.
So dispatchable for one side and intermittent for another side.
Yes.
Yes, that's the point. Let's see. We have another comment. Variability is the challenge. Yeah, that's right. Dr.
Yeah.
So
Rob.
one thing, I don't know how many people say this, but a lot of people talk, Armando, about natural gas as being a transition fuel. Actually, I think if you look at it from a longer term perspective, that may be true, but actually I think wind and solar are transitional ways of generating electricity. They're not particularly good because they are not reliable. They are intermittent, but all of this is in a way, I think, holding action for the longer term development of viable nuclear power. Okay, so we know that there are issues and there's a lot of pushback against nuclear power around the world for various reasons. Some of them good, some of them not particularly good reasons. But in the long term, we are actually, I'm looking forward to the point when the world is going to have controllable fusion power. Okay, now that may be another 50 years, but 50 years is not that long if you think about it, right? I mean, that's only in the 2070s. So it's very possible, and there's even a news story today that, another advance in this particular area, even if it were longer than that. Again, wind and solar are not really very good, to be honest with you. The only thing that they're good at is they don't emit carbon dioxide. That's about it. However, again, that's only if you're not counting the fact that in order to make those things, you actually have to do a lot of mining of materials. Wow. And that mining also causes emissions of, can't be done without power. And that power cannot be generated by solar and wind, which means that you have to generate that power using fossil fuels in order to make renewable energy. So it's kind of a catch-22 on that. But in the long run, I think research is really important, research and development into advanced ways of producing electricity and producing the heat that's needed to actually do the work that's needed in advanced economies. I think that's all very important. There's one other thing I'd like to talk about, if you don't mind, Armando.
Sure.
Which is there's another factor that I don't see come up in the discussion about natural gas. that I think is really extremely important, especially for the developing world. And that is the fact that when you produce natural gas in most places around the world, you don't just produce methane, but you also produce heavier hydrocarbons, such as ethane, propane, and butane, which are together called natural gas liquids. Now, it's a little bit of a funny thing because they're actually gases, but they call them liquids because if you put them under some degree of pressure, they can be transported. You don't actually have to cool them. You just need to put them under pressure, and they can be then put into a liquid form and then transported very easily. But the important point is that when you mix these together in certain ratios, you get something called LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. And the United States is not just the world's largest exporter of natural gas, but it's actually the world's largest exporter of LPG right now. And there's tremendous capability for increasing liquefied petroleum gas exports. Why is that important? Because that's actually how you help these countries in South America, in Southern Africa, in Southeast Asia, and other countries, Middle East, help them to develop their economies and move their economies away from very harmful traditional ways of producing energy, such as through gathered wood, charcoal, dung, other kinds of things. So how do you bring these people up to a level of economics that is safe for the environment and is better health-wise for all of the people? One of the big answers for that is by LPG. So LPG systems have been in place in Mexico and in South America for some time. They need to be extended around the world. But again, the capability is there. The economics needs to be there as well. But that's one thing in terms of sustainability goals, 7 point whatever it is, that UN has stated, which is affordable energy for everyone. Then electricity produced from natural gas that comes by LNG, and cooking fuels and other fuels that come via LPG, I think is a marvelous solution and something that should be promoted, not hindered in the energy transition.
And the volumes that the United States are exporting to Europe nowadays of LNG is fantastic. It's replacing the Russia natural gas, 400 million cubic meters per day that Nord Stream 1 and 2 interrupted this. So this is a kind of a solution that was not considered in the past, but nowadays is extremely, let's see, helpful.
Yeah, it was really important. And, some of the decisions that Europe is making are very good. There's still, I think, a lot of resistance on the part of certain political interests. The Green Party in Europe and so forth are still very much opposed to natural gas and LNG. But, it's one thing to be opposed in sort of a idealistic sense. It's another thing to offer workable solutions. And there are no workable solutions in Europe without natural gas, at least for the next 30 or 40 years. So opposing natural gas, instead of working out some way of integrating it into the economies in a way that, you also handle your geopolitical issues with Russia, but doing it in as clean a way as possible, I think, is something that the Europeans should be doing. And some people in Europe are in fact working in that direction.
Perfect. You know that in Brazil, several times we used natural gas to be, let's see, a backup for intermittent hydroelectric. In 2001 and 2018, we had some crisis in terms of electric generation, and we used natural gas to substitute, to replace with thermal. So this is something important. So it's not only to replace sometimes as a backup, but for a long-term use of natural gas in the industry, residence, and everything. No.
I agree with you. And Brazil is a very special place in so many different ways, but its energy system is subject to the weather,
Exactly.
just as you were talked about. So, so much of electricity in Brazil is based on the hydro cycle. And unfortunately, this is not regular. It's not regular every single year. So you do get low hydro years, high hydro years, and so forth. So like you said, you have to have something to replace the hydro when it's not available. And for Brazil, natural gas is potentially a really good solution because it is something that has been used in the past. But there's another reason too, Armando, which is, you know what? It's not just the United States that has big gas resources. South America has huge gas resources. Yes. As we all know, Argentina in the Vaca Muerta.
Yeah.
That dead cow, I mean, it's a big area.
Bolivia is a strong place for natural gas too.
And offshore Brazil also, there's a lot of resources there. So South America has these resources, and unfortunately, sometimes one country and the other country in South America don't get along too well. And that is, an issue that South Americans need to resolve themselves, because you do have the resources to handle these situations. And just the different countries need to work together in order to make that happen, in my opinion.
Cyrus, what do you prefer? It's a tricky question, huh? Nuclear or natural gas?
I think you have to have both. But I was thinking a lot about this, and if you don't mind me to back up just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, so we talked about the developing world, and we talked about Europe. I was looking at Politico today, or actually published a few days ago, talked about the divide in the Biden administration about a lot about natural gas projects. I totally get the feeling that that they're happy to approve, and they mentioned it, these natural gas projects for transporting to Europe and Western countries. But it doesn't do that much good for developing nations. It does give some income, to a place like Mozambique or other places which are looking for LNG exports. But that's just the beginning. I mean, they need their own infrastructure, and one of the strings you say that is held by Western nations is the purse strings of finance and lending, and sometimes they are inhibiting the lending based on ideological reasons. But let's look at this. So now let's bring it all back. We talked about intermittent solar and wind, and we talked about okay. Now let's talk about nuclear. Well, okay. So if we're going to talk about, for example, Brazil, hydroelectric and all this kind of, we can't. You don't even have electrical lines going into villages. And some places, they are remote. But you could have some portable fuel. Now, what kind of portable fuel do you have? Well, you have wood, dung, coal, and you have like LPG or propane or something like this. So
they are transportable.
They're transportable. So what you can get is, you don't want to burn wood or coal or dung because of the fumes. And in the sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking about 4 million people a year dying from pulmonary sickness, right? Because of basically pollution indoors from cooking. If you look at it, nuclear is not really a solution for the developing world immediately. But look at where nuclear exists. It exists in the developed world. It exists,
France, for instance. France,
for instance.
70% of energy
Yes, and
grid.
China is investing big in nuclear, as you probably heard. France
And
just
Germany
made a big
and
announcement.
Germany is zero today. They closed the
Germany has closed it, you know, but even I mean, supply the majority of your fuel with nuclear as you develop, you know, and now you have a lot more flexibility. But I mean, nuclear is also only electricity. It doesn't give you the other
petrochemical and
the other hydrocarbons. You know, I mean, you have methane as the lightest, and then you got the heavier fuels as Dr. Brooks pointed out. So you can transport these to smaller areas. So if you have say a big port and you have LPG, and then say you have start to set up some smaller distribution centers, and then those remote areas can actually get fuel from these remote distribution centers, and it starts to become a network. Plus, it develops a local economy. So I wouldn't really say nuclear or gas, but I'd say optimally, you know, the highest power source you would want that near cities, you know, big cities with you know with lots of nuclear power, and you wouldn't need these long, like I mean. They're going to put transmission lines from Oklahoma to California. I mean these are really long transmission
some limitations.
lines.
Yes.
You know, you're going to require lots of materials. That's lots of greenhouse gas. Also from the mining, as you know, the sulfur hexafluoride from all the switch gear, all those things is in so on and so forth. Yeah.
Dr. Robert, why United States, some places in the United States are banning natural gas in the homes, and the residences. There's a prohibition of stoves, and what's the reason of that?
I think that's a good question. You know, I think it's based more on ideology, anti-fossil fuel ideology, more than anything else. It's certainly not based on science. It's not based on logic. It's based on ideology. Now, I mean, if you're overriding logic and the only thing that you're concerned with is your belief that carbon dioxide is, you know, the worst gas that there is in this world, and that it is truly going to cause the world to boil, as they think that it's happening, then you put all of the stress on that. However, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, I don't think. In the end, what happens? And that is, if you replace the use of natural gas in appliances and so forth with electricity, well, what is that electricity going to be generated with? Strangely enough, it might be generated more with natural gas. It might be generated more with coal. It might be generated more with nuclear. It might be, you know, one thing for sure is it's not going to be generated by solar during the nighttime. We know that for sure. And it's not going to be generated by wind during the daytime when the wind's not blowing. So the point is that, you know, you also need to look at physics and thermodynamics and these things. And what you find is that it is much less efficient to use electricity for heating, for cooking and so forth, than it is to use natural gas. In the end, you are defeating yourself. So I think it's more politics and ideology than it is science. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Perfect. I agree with you. Dr. Robert, the electrification of the world means the grid must support this amount of energy that is needed by grid. How governments and companies can follow this expansion of grid demands?
Very, very difficult. In the United States, getting new power plants linked to the grid sometimes takes many years. So it almost doesn't matter how much, you know, you make a new wind farm, you make a new, you know, central solar receiving station. But if you can't connect it to the grid, and if you can't send it to areas where it's going to be consumed, what good is it? By the way, the United States is not the only place where this happens. I understand that there are a lot of places where, for example, in China and Mongolia, where these solar systems have been built, and they are just completely independent. They're not connected to the Chinese grid. There are no lines. And so it's just wasted investment money, wasted capital. And I think that that's what a lot of people are concerned about, is that trillions of dollars are going to be actually wasted in non-producing systems such as this, because they're not really integrated and integratable into the grid. So connection is a problem. Building lines and wires is a problem. It's hard to get people to allow these things. So, you also have to get the public to allow these lines to get built. I remember years ago when I lived in California, the green advocates were trying to get solar energy from the desert on the one side, but then the other green environmentalists and native rights and so forth, they didn't want solar power out in the deserts because it was going to hurt the desert tortoise and the burial grounds of various Indian tribes and so forth. So you have these conflicting objectives that are very hard to overcome. So I don't know what the answer is, Armando. I think it's going to be very difficult to actually make good use of all that capital that you're going to be, if you're going to try to integrate a huge increase in the amount of renewable power into the grid.
Perfect. Cyrus and Robert, please. I would like to address the last point. Looking ahead, predictions, forecasts, and the market analysis, how Dr. Robert and the company you work for can help, can support these simulations, visions, analysis. How can you do? And of course, Dr. Robert, please bring us your experience. I know that you are a very experienced guy, and you have a company, you drive a company called RABC. Is it correct?
RBAC, that's right.
RBAC. Yeah, please.
Well, sure. Actually, my journey has been quite a long one. I was actually a student at MIT in engineering back in the 1960s. And I saw that there were certain things that I didn't like about, like a lot of people who grew up in the 1960s, there were things that I didn't really like about where our country was heading. And so I moved in a different direction. And one of the things that I saw was that I thought that, this idea of solar energy and producing solar energy on a large scale was really a good idea. And I was pretty much in agreement with most of my peers that the fossil fuel companies were evil. They were bad. This was about the time that the Exxon Valdez ran aground in Alaska, spilling millions of barrels of oil and causing an environmental catastrophe. So I think I was very much in agreement with so many people who were anti. But what happened was that I decided to go to graduate school and was much more interested in energy than I was in aerospace engineering, which was my first original purpose. And I had an opportunity to learn about energy economics at MIT in the graduate program. And in fact, I needed a job, and I got a job working with a project in an area that I knew nothing about, which was called natural gas and natural gas markets. And so I went from being a proponent of solar power to learning about natural gas and how vital it was. But not only that, but how to use mathematics and economics theory to develop forecasting systems. And in fact, I worked with a group at MIT, which then presented its results to Congress and helped in the whole process of deregulating the natural gas industry of the United States back in the 1970s. So I continued my work. I got very interested in energy. I continued my work and eventually created this company called RBAC. And our purpose is to provide forecasting and analytic tools that energy industry companies and policymakers in government can use to help make better energy decisions and better energy policy for all of the people that they're responsible for. So, our mission is based on the fact that with better analytical tools, these better decisions and policies will be made. And as a result of those better decisions, you can produce energy at lower cost and therefore deliver energy around the world at a lower cost to make it more available for places, not just the developing world, but not just the developed world, but the developing world as well. So that's what our purpose is. And, we've got lots of customers and that are using it and very happy with our products. And, we try to keep up with the industry, Armando. It's a very exciting industry. It's always very interesting, but it's always changing.
Yeah.
And so, you have to change your tools in order to keep up with the changing industry as well. And we try to do that.
And Cyrus and Robert, so the reliability of energy is something that you can simulate and can forecast in your systems?
Well, there are so many variables that you can't necessarily predict with accuracy, but you can do comparative studies and look at this policy versus that policy, this kind of investment versus that kind of investment. And so you can make choices that will be helpful if you're a decision maker in a company or if you're a policy maker in the government. And that's what we try to do.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that engineering, if you look at engineering, I mean, you're dealing with, you're dealing a lot with whatever is the best choice. I mean, engineering has no black and whites. Usually it has some
probabilistic view.
Yeah, probabilistic view. And, you got a safety factor and you got all these things. And then you got a variety of scenarios to deal with. If it's a bridge, you're looking at wind and vibration, you're looking at corrosion, you're looking at all these kind of things. It's also similar with energy. And I would just add that, with not just with companies, but also policymakers, I think a lot of times what we hear in the media is that we hear some kind of narrow view. And I think one thing I've really liked about this company and what we're trying to do, which is a little bit more of a, philanthropic view, like a real humanitarian kind of view, is we're trying to help people make a better decision based on a much, much wider view of energy. Because if you could do it, with the whole picture there, then of course you can. You can say, this is a good decision for us. This is not. So, whether someone's going to choose this energy source or that energy source, it's not really my decision for them. It's California or it's India or whatever. But if they have, really good, they have really good analytics, they have a really good process, and they have the full picture, then I think they can make a decision. If you look at their stream of thought and their supporting evidence, they can make a decision that actually makes some sense,
Less errors. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Robert and Engineer Cyrus, was a great pleasure have you here today with this nice conversation about natural gas, the whole of natural gas. And I hope that we can talk again and you can bring more details about your simulators and forecasters system so you can plan something like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Armando. It's been a pleasure to do this podcast with you. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thanks again. Talk again.
Yeah, there is one comment more here, please.
Okay.
Please, it's important to base decisions on real data and knowing potential long-term effects rather than acting based on feel. Sorry, I cannot read very well here.
It's rather than acting based on feeling and thinking something may be better with nothing to back it up.
Oh, great.
I think that's the point that I made earlier, which was, it's one thing to think of these things in an idealistic way, which is what I was doing back in the 60s and early 70s. But you also need to have an alternative. If you're going to say, this is no good and we can't use this anymore,
Right.
then okay, we can say, fine, what's the alternative? And unfortunately, the alternatives do not match up with even what we have right now. So I'm hopeful that bright young researchers and students, who do research will come up with better ideas over time. But don't forget, you always have to balance the idealism with the pragmatism. Because if you don't have something that's workable, nobody's going to be happy, for sure.
Yes,
Excellent.
exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.